Joining us today as we do this week's edition of Going Deeper. And I've got Gary Holdsworth with me. Gary's just done a message for us around enlarging your capacity in terms of our physical health. So thanks for that, Gary. Look, there's a bunch of stuff in there that was just so practical in terms of things that we can pay attention to that will actually make a real difference in how we live life. I want to start with this. One of the early things you said was that our body doesn't actually belong to us. When we are a disciple of Jesus, our body actually belongs to God because he resides in it, and that we should actually use our body to bring honour to him. Can you just unpack a little bit for us what you're thinking when you sort of put that together?
Yeah, it was interesting. I suppose as I was researching for the message and looking for, where's the biblical part of this message, because it can be a very practical message, talking about things like exercise and diet and all that kind of stuff. So trying to base it around how does Christ or how does God view us in terms of our body. And, as I was looking into the fact that God lives within us, he makes us our body sacred and holy. He's dwelling in us. He's called us to do this work. And so it's really, our body is really a tool in a lot of ways, so we need to be looking after it. If God's called us to do work here on the earth, then we need to make sure it's actually in a fit state to carry out what he's called us to do. So I think sometimes we can think, our body, it's our own, we can do with it as we please. If I feel like eating, Doritos and Kit Kats, sitting in front of the telly and, all that kind of stuff, I will. But I think there's a point at which, and there's nothing wrong with that kind of stuff in moderation, but at some point we need to kind of make the decision, well, what does being a good steward look like in terms of making sure that my body is equipped and ready to do the work that God's called me to do. So
and I think that's a key thing, that having this understanding that when we have good capacity physically, the primary goal for that is that we can actually do what God's called us to do. We can be part of his mission in the world. And I think we often miss that because we reduce it to being about ourselves and building my own kingdom, that sort of thinking. But in the middle of all that, you used the word that we're stewards, which I really liked. And it brought to mind for me the fact that we do this readily in other aspects of our life, but maybe not with our physical bodies. So this week I booked my car in for a service. Now, nothing's wrong with the car that I'm aware of, but I will get it serviced regularly to make sure it can keep doing the things that I need it to be doing.
Yep.
Why don't we have that sort of attention to our body?
It's a good point. I think, you're right. We do preventative practices, like with vehicles and other things, to make sure that they will go the distance. And I think that is part of the issue that we have, is that we live very much in the here and now. We're not really paying attention to what our behaviours are going to do for us in the long term. And I think that's where that whole, when I was looking into that research, and 50% of us are suffering with these chronic conditions. That doesn't happen overnight, but those are the results of kind of long-term choices and decisions and behaviours, whether we realise that it's having that impact or not.
Nearly an accumulation of neglect and poor treatment.
That's right. So we're living longer, but unfortunately we're not necessarily living those extra years in good health and in a position to be able to do everything God's called us to do and enjoy life.
When you unpacked those four key areas, and I don't think we need to go into depth in those now, but you touched on our sleep, our rest, our diet, and our exercise. And you did mention that generally, because we have a pretty good education system in Australia, we grow up knowing about those things and the importance of them and how to do them, but we still generally, and I'm just generalising, neglect that information and that knowledge when it comes to practically doing things. What do you think's going on there for the average person? Why are we neglecting the stuff we know to be good for us in favour for something else, whatever that something else is?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think probably part of that is the ease I think the part of it is too is that I suppose when it comes to food, usually the stuff that is not so good for us tastes really good, doesn't it? It's kind of full of sugar, it's full of fat, it's full of that kind of stuff that makes us feel really good.
And I justify that personally. I say, God gave us taste buds for a reason.
Exactly.
And if it tastes good, then let's eat it.
Yep. So I think for us today, it's probably harder than it ever has been to eat well because we have all those options. You know, like I was saying to Jeff earlier, like no one had to preach a message like this back in Jesus' time because they basically just ate what they cultivated. Like we make, you know, we grow barley, we make bread, we eat legumes, we just eat what we have. They didn't have 7-Eleven and Coles and McDonald's, and so we've probably walked 10 miles to get the water to help make the bread. Exactly. Yeah. So they were getting all the exercise, and they were probably eating pretty good food, generally speaking. Yeah. So that was all kind of built into their lifestyle. For us, I think it's a lot harder. It actually takes discipline and intentional decisions to make those good choices. And if I think the thing is, it feels good to relax and sit around and not go for a walk or, you know. So we choose often the easy option.
Yeah, I think you're right. Comfort and ease is a real barrier, isn't it?
Yeah.
Another barrier you touched on, and it was referenced last week when we looked at spiritual health as well, is that hurry is the enemy of good health, a hurried life. What do you think is going on deep in someone's psyche and in their core beliefs to say that I need to be productive, I need to be busy, and because I think that's true of where I'm at, I will neglect the things that you've pointed out are actually good for us physically.
Yeah. I think what's happening is it's not so much a conscious decision to not look after ourselves. I think what it is that we're so caught up in our busy schedules, we've got commitments, we've got responsibilities, and we feel, you know, compelled to really make sure that we deliver on all that stuff. Yep. And things like choosing to eat well or get enough exercise becomes like an afterthought. It's like I said, it's like with rest. Rather than thinking of it as a necessity, we think of those things as a luxury.
Luxury, yeah.
You know, I'll slip some downtime in when I can, and because I'm so busy, I'll just grab something from the drive-through rather than getting a proper meal. So I think it's almost a side effect of our busy lives that neglect happens. I don't think it's intentional, but it's probably because we maybe aren't thinking about the long-term effect of those decisions in how that impacts us.
Yeah, so that idea that I'm achieving, I'm producing, many of us can have that just as a core belief in us that is the most important thing about us, whereas the picture I see through Jesus is more about who you are, not what you do. And then with the life we have with Christ, the what we do comes out of who we are, and we often get that the wrong way around, which is why I think sleep, and you touched on sleep, there's something about sleeping for 8 hours that says, God, you're in control, not me. I can stop and produce nothing, and you're still okay with me, and the world will continue. I think is a nice position to have.
Yeah, I think that's very true, and I think that's true of probably the concept of Sabbath and rest as well.
Yeah, very much.
Is really kind of saying, we feel this compulsion to always kind of, I've got another job to do, I've got things on my list, but to refrain from that and just go, I'm just going to trust God. I'm just going to be in a place of rest because, it's good. It's a good thing for us. God designed us to need that rest. Yeah. I think that's really important. And sleep, we talked about sleep problems and sleep issues, and part of it, I think, too, is like we lie awake worrying about our lives. We can't get off to sleep because we're stressed and worried. And as you said, that oftentimes it's being able to switch off and trust God, that He's got our lives in His hands. But it's easier said than done sometimes.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Well, thank you for what you did share with us today. There are a lot of really practical tips and advice in that, and I would encourage anyone who's checking this out to go back and listen to the message again on our YouTube channel or on our podcast. And so thank you, Gary, for what you were able to share with us today. What I know you're living yourself, and there's a great example of what it means to do that. I know there's a lot of things I need to have a think about, and having a Kit Kat is probably not what I'm going to do. Sorry for that interruption during the message. So thanks for being with us today. We'll go deeper again next week, and we'll see you then.